All right, everyone. Trump's administration is going to be lifting some restrictions in an environmental capacity with regards especially to wildlife refuges, the use of certain neonid pesticides there, neonicotinoid, I believe, as well as the planting of GMO crops near or in them. Because you got to realize some wildlife refuges, they're not like perfectly round or something. You can have an indentation that goes to some farm a mile in. And there are restrictions, I guess. You know, you're right next to the refuge. No, you can't plant this certain crop because, it's frankenfood, basically. I actually strongly oppose this move. I think that it should be left as is. I'm going to tell you why. GMO is a boogeyman in one sense. Some people, when they talk about genetic modification, they're not realizing that there are two fundamentally different groups of GMOs. The first is, hey, we've bred this plant a certain way. It's not a mutant, you've bred it, it's genetically modified using genes that were in the pool of the species to begin with. The other side is that it has been in a laboratory changed further. Genes that were not part of it, like you put jellyfish genes in a tomato or something. Generally speaking, it's not really necessarily a huge problem. There's no specific evidence that most of those changes do anything substantial. It's like you're giving it drought resistance, you're giving it disease resistance. It's not, shown to be harmful. It's been in the food chain of humans for 10 years and nothing's happened. Then there are a few modifications that go a little bit further, like modifying a plant to produce its own toxin. Okay, well, you'd think that that could be a problem for humans, or modifying a plant to store pesticide within its flesh for long periods. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think that is a problem. I do believe in GMO labeling for that purpose. I mean, if it's just been selectively bred, it's not technically a GMO. It's traditionally bred. Create a new classification so people know the difference. If you believe in consumer labeling, like Bernie Sanders and all the progressives, they're like, oh, people have a right to know. Okay. They also have a right to know that there's a difference between something that a farmer bred for 100 years and, through 3 generations, and something that's been injected in a lab with fucking giraffe DNA or something. There's a big difference. As far as the pesticides go, some of these are linked to colony collapse. They're linked to bee die-offs. Now, again, I'm of two minds. I'm going to explain something that a lot of, maybe the environmentalist lovers on this channel won't like. If you look at a map of bee population density, there's something a lot more obvious than pesticides that's responsible, and it's linked to farming practices. It's called grain monoculture. The United States, if you look at the grain belt of the United States, there aren't a lot of bees there. That's because there's nothing for them to eat. There's nothing there for them because they need flowers. What do we know about corn and wheat and some of these species? They're not supplying anything to the bees. There's no nectar within them in that sense. They're wind sown, essentially. The wind comes along, nice breeze. The corn's sperm basically just drifts around in the cornfield, pollinating the corn plants. It's basically a big grass plant. Doesn't provide anything for bees. If you have 100 square miles of nothing more than grains, you're not going to find a lot of bees in there. People's home gardens might supply a small population. That's about all you're going to find. That being said, yeah, these pesticides are blasted all over these fields too. It's literally a wasteland of biodiversity. This shouldn't be happening. Monoculture is the worst thing to do within farming from a perspective of efficiency, time and efficiency. Monoculture makes sense. From any other single perspective, including long-term viability and income, it's the worst thing you can do because it forces you to be reliant on chemical fertilizer at the very least anyway. It encourages the kind of conditions that lead to locust plagues and shit, forcing you to use a lot of pesticide. It costs more. In terms of resources, everything other than time usage, the amount of extra time required to develop. And in the modern age, I'm sure you could do this. Machines to harvest a companion planted field with the same speed and efficiency, it would be minuscule compared to the cost of the chemicals that you have to use otherwise. Plant your corn with beans. There'll be more pollinators. Trust me, you won't need as much fertilizer long term. The soil structure will be better. Less erosion, less runoff. Things are a little bit better off. It's better if you're companion planting multiple things in the same field. And bullshit. When I go out to my garden, which is, all things considered, not particularly large and was not particularly expensive to build, and I see the amount of produce that I'm capable of creating while using 0 pesticide, while using no chemical fertilizers. When I see the amount of produce I'm capable of gathering, yeah, it is possible to have that niche of, actual family farming, some responsible practices. But neonicotinoid pesticides should be banned. And it should not just on wildlife refuges or near them, by the way. Like, at some point, they sprayed defoliant out behind my house. I don't know what kind of defoliant they used. It's probably something that causes leukemia. We're not that far from a fucking elementary school. It's right next to the city's water supply, and yet they're spraying some sort of chemical that some of those trees are still dead there now. They did that when they were servicing the power lines. It was an overgrown area, and I'm like, well, why couldn't you have just, slashed through this area with a machine? And deforested it the manual way instead of spraying some chemical, which they clearly did. I got no forewarning that anything was being sprayed. I never got a leaflet since the property's right next to this spot. Hey, we're going to be spraying such and such. You might want to stay indoors or go to town that day while it sort of settles out and kills all these plants. It's like, within 100 yards of my garden, I'm like, well, fuck me, basically. What I would say is some of these chemicals shouldn't be used at all. Because, think about it this way. Say you get a farm, and some 10-acre farm, there's other houses around or something, other people's properties. They might get exposed to those chemicals under many conditions. It's involuntary, and in some cases, they are linked to health problems. You get some kid with asthma living next to the farm, all of a sudden they fucking keel over, they can't breathe. Could be a little bit of a problem. I have a feeling that long-term, you look at health right now, and I pointed this out, and other people who are in medicine have pointed this out. The old concept within medicine of sterility is sort of passing by in favor of probiotics. Like, the idea is, hey, instead of trying to keep everything sterile, which you can't, having everything airlocked like fucking Bubble Boy, why don't we introduce beneficial, non-toxic, totally non-harmful bacteria into the surgery center, and it'll preclude other bacteria from growing. It'll be great. You'll have much lower case of sepsis. Smear yogurt on your wound, basically. What if we take up that banner with regards to farming? Instead of trying to kill off all the insects, just plant a whole bunch of shit in the same field. Their density will never be high enough to be a problem. And there are, by the way, natural substances that work as pesticides, some of which are cheaper anyway. And people spray like neem oil, which is, non-harmful. I know it's not exact. Neem oil has its own problems because I believe it's plant-derived, and therefore you could drive the plant to extinction. It's like palm oil, that's killing off half the orangutans in Borneo right now. I happen to believe in environmentalism. Real environmentalism, though. I don't believe the state should come in generally and dictate things, but when you've got this kind of poison being sprayed around, at the very least it shouldn't be near a wildlife refuge. There is not being farmed anyway. What's the point of having it anywhere near these spots? If your farm is right up against a wildlife refuge, either move a little bit the borders of the refuge, or say, hey, can we buy out your farm? Put something else there that doesn't need, a bunch of chemicals sprayed on it. We'll offer you twice its value or something. Some of these people would sell it. Why would you want to farm at this point anyway, considering how loveless and thankless a job it is? You just get fucked over and over. Most of the farmers left Vermont for that very reason. It's like, well, fuck us, because of the state tax rates on our land. We're not going to make any money. State has to come in and subsidize everything for people to even have a zero-sum sort of situation. Yeah, I made $10,000 this year. I worked 300 days. I worked 12 hours a day. Yeehaw, I'm sure my kids will want to continue this profession. No, they're not. The only kind of farms that are going to be left outside of those big monoculture factory farms you find in the Midwest are going to be niche farms where someone grows something and slaps Made in Vermont on it. Made in Vermont garlic. Same garlic you get at the grocery store, but, we raised it with love and it's twice as expensive. That's what's going to end up happening to us. At least our farms here generally have, better practices. They're still spraying chemicals. I can guarantee you go up to the Champlain Valley where you have the larger farms. Do you think they don't spray these things all over those fields that raise GMO crops? It's like there have been cases, some idiot will be driving the GMO seed truck by. A couple seeds land in the farmer's field, and then the farmer gets sued because it interbred with their crops, and they lose in court. It's like fantastic for these companies. Literally, they could just have an agent go and throw a couple handfuls of seed on your field. They'll own you forever. How wonderful does that work for them? They can even do it maliciously because they own the copyright to a living thing. I think it's ridiculous. It's not helpful either. The old heirloom varieties work just as well. Breeding something to be a little more drought or disease tolerant or something, yeah, people have been doing that for a million years. It's like they have to put a GMO label on something that is technically not genetically modified. When people think of GMO, they think of, hey, in a laboratory, some dude with a line of scalpels and injectors and a pipette and sequencing machines turned this into frankenfood. They don't think of, hey, for 4 generations, this group of farmers bred this plant, and now it's, demonstrably different from the original strain. But that's a GMO too. It still gets labeled as such, and it's, again, it's fucking stupid that happens. Now, that's my thought on it. I oppose the Trump admin on this one. I think this is a terrible idea. That's about all. Peace out.